over a couple of myths.
Just the emotion piece
Yep.
of dangerous?
Yep. Start
So I
right
want to share, we're taping this to kind of edit to use for our website. So I want to share a few of the myths around emotion. The first of the myths is emotions are dangerous. We have to control them. There is something dangerous. Unlistened to emotion. If you don't listen to someone tell their story, they're going to keep trying and trying and trying. It's unlistened to emotion. You know, so many of the horrible acts of violence and afterwards, you know, when people kind of keep tracing back to what was that person saying, what were they doing, what was on their social media, it's like years of somebody saying help and nobody listening, nobody paying attention. So it's not that emotions are dangerous, it's unlistened to emotion. The second myth is, well, you're hauling people up and asking them to tell a story about something that's already happened. Isn't it better to forget? We don't forget. How many of you remember hurtful things that happened to you as a child? We don't forget. And what's powerful when you have someone telling their story is people are listening. So many times when these hurtful things happen, nobody was there. If somebody was there, they did not intervene. You didn't have allies. You certainly didn't have a whole group of people to tell your story to. It's a very powerful piece. And I often share a story years ago, and I have done many of my own sharing speak outs, particularly around being Jewish and anti-Semitism. And an NCBI leader at the time was a principal of a high school. And he had set up and invited Colin Powell to come for the graduation, to give the talk at graduation. And graduation was scheduled for a Saturday, for the Jewish Sabbath. And he learned that there was an Orthodox Jewish student who could not go to his graduation because it was scheduled on Saturday. And so he remembered my stories around anti-Semitism and being left out. And he called Colin Powell's office to change the date. And Colin Powell could no longer come on the changed date. So they had to get a different speaker for graduation. And a number of the parents were apparently upset because they were excited about having their young people get to hear Colin Powell. And he never told me this. Someone told me, another NCBI person. And I called him up in tears. And I said, "Why did you change your graduation?" He said, "Cherie, I put up my hand all those times when you did a speak out about being a Jew and about anti-Semitism. And that student was you. And I had made an increased commitment to fight anti-Semitism, and I was not going to have a Jewish student not be able to attend their own graduation." So I was so moved, and it was like, okay, that show of hands makes a difference. It is not a throwaway movement. That when you're up against that moment, there are many moments, and I remember the faces of my beloved NCBI leaders. I remember the stories I've heard them say, and it helps me. So it's not that we are just hauling people out to tell stories of the past. We are assisting them to get allies, which is a very profound thing. The next, which is an important one, well, okay, maybe it's okay for people to tell their stories. Maybe this work is useful, but shouldn't people have graduate training before they do this work? And we have now trained, I don't know, I have no idea the numbers, Ira. What do you think? Thousands and thousands of high school students. Ira's got, 3 high schools in Albany alone. We have high schools in Monterey, California, and Rochester, New York. We've done them in London. Switzerland's done a decade of training high school students. We have trained thousands and thousands of high school students to lead this work. We were built into in a particular community, school district, we were part of a remedy. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, sued the school for racial disparities in discipline, which is a big issue in many K-12 schools. And we were built in as part of the remedy. So we were in that school district for 5 years. And every year we went and trained high school students to lead this work in their high schools. I have never once had a high school student come to me and say, shouldn't I have to go to graduate school first before I do this? Sometimes their guidance counselors say that, but never the students. And so what it says to me, we have to teach people you're supposed to have graduate, not to denigrate anyone in this room. I have a master's degree in counseling. It's not to denigrate anyone who has counseling training. But these are human skills. That's why I always say that if you're on a bus or a plane, these are human skills that we are teaching people, which is about listening to each other's stories. And we've had high school students lead speak-outs with their teachers. We had high school students do it with the school board. They led a mini workshop with the school board in their school district and actually do speak-outs with a school board member. It was really, really quite amazing. So there's just 2 more. Well, but aren't you re-injuring someone to bring them up? Or aren't you exploiting someone? We would never do this piece of the workshop if it was only good for those of us listening, because that is exploitation. And you didn't get to see Larry or I asking people privately, and we will teach you how to do that in a little bit this morning. But as long as someone says yes, it's at least as powerful for the person telling their story, getting that show of hands, getting allies, as it is for those of us listening. So that's a little bit around some of the theory piece. And so what we want to do, and Larry and I are going to demonstrate for you, is we want to look at what some of the messages were in our homes growing up about emotion, particularly the tears. Because as you saw yesterday, we had some of the people who shared a story cried. How many of you cried sitting and listening to one of the stories yesterday? So, we have tears listening, we have tears sharing. I will say there's no requirement. It's not like if you don't cry, you're a bad person. That's not the point. But we want to be able to be open to emotion that sometimes gets shared with the stories. And so we do need to look at a little bit what happened to us when we were growing up when someone cried. So let's just hear from what happened when you cried or someone cried in your family growing up. What do you remember? What happened?
You're not supposed to cry.
You're not supposed to cry. What else? Okay.
Big girl quit crying.
Big girl quit crying.
Go to your room.
Go to your room. Who got sent to their room when they cried? Who got told, you want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. That was my dad. There's certain training phrases that people learn in all different cultures. It's quite amazing. So we learned all kinds of things. So what we want to do, and we want you to have fun with this, we're going to demonstrate a little role play practice, which is, the goal of it is to help you get in touch with what some of the messages were in your family growing up when you or someone else cried. Because the more we can look at it, then we can be able to be open without lugging those messages with us. So Larry and then we're going to have you do this in pairs. We're going to ask you to take turns, and one of you to exaggerate being very emotional and sad. Ready? Okay. Once you go. Yeah.
You want me to go first?
Yeah. Are you okay? Larry, are you okay? Are you okay? And that was my beloved mom. That whenever I or anyone else cried, she would be so panicked as a Jewish female. She was like, are you all right? Are you all right? And I was like, I'm fine. And I realized I would never show anything, because she would get way more upset than I could ever be. So that's what happened in my home. Okay, so we'll take turns. Larry!
Not that bad. It is not that bad.
I'm going somewhere else. And how does that connect to your growing up?
Well, I just wasn't really allowed to show any emotion at all. I was kind of like the oldest, and we were in an abusive household. And for me to, to show any emotion, it scared the daylights out of my mother, because I was kind of like the buffer. And so, yeah, that was.
Thank you. So that's what we want you to do, and and when it's your turn to role play, try to exaggerate, because that's going to help your partner to get in touch with their. And again, we're asking you not what's you think NCBI is teaching you to do, but what's your gut response, just as we just did, and then think about how does that connect to what messages you got in your home growing up around emotion and in particular crying. Okay? And have fun with this. So find a partner to do this with.
I'm going on
So you have to take your coat off for this, huh?
All right. No,
I was getting hot. I was getting hot a little bit. Okay.
I'm into avoidance.
Okay, you go first?
Okay.
You want to go first? You want to be the responder while I
Overreaction. Over.
How you doing this morning?
That's kind of, that's the way I normally would.
What makes you think about that? I would say it's interesting for me because